Cannot move anything.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Atlantic Book Awards event, Storytellers of Cape Breton, which is presented in partnership with the Cabot Writers Festival and the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia. I'm Rebecca Slayter, and I'm the Artistic Director of the Cabot Writers Festival. And it's my great pleasure and honor to be able to speak with the three writers who are our guests this evening. But first, it is our privilege and responsibility to start this evening by acknowledging the land on which we gather for the Atlantic Book Awards Festival. With this year's festival being held online, we recognize that a singular land acknowledgement cannot reach the richness of distribution across the Atlantic provinces and beyond that we hope the festival will. But wherever you're connecting from tonight, if like me, you're not Indigenous, I hope you'll take this time to consider the first people of that territory and the treaties that govern the rights and responsibilities that we all share as treaty people. The three authors who are participating tonight and I are connecting with you from Unama'ki, also known as Cape Breton. And Unama'ki is part of Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which the Wolastoqiyik and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1726. Those treaties didn't make any reference to surrendering land or resources, and instead they provided a framework of rights and responsibilities for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. And this evening, as we hear from these three wonderful Cape Breton storytellers, I hope that we'll remember that the legacy of storytelling on this island extends back thousands of years with the Mi'kmaq stories that have been passed down through the mouths and ears of Mi'kmaq people for countless generations, including the great poet Rita Joe and the generations of writers, storytellers, and listeners who now inherit that tradition. And I hope that we all are listening to the many strong and vital voices that are sharing those stories today. And now, before we get started, I also wanted to mention that if any of you have questions for the writers tonight, I shouldn't get to have all the fun. You can share them. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button for Q&A. And if you open up that, you can submit a question of your own. And at the end of the conversation this evening, we'll leave some time to get to some of those questions and bring them to the authors directly. So please feel free to, at any time during this panel, jump in with questions of your own. And now I am delighted to present to you our three authors taking part in this panel this evening. First is Lesley Crewe, who is the author of 12 books, including Beholden, Mary Mary, Amazing Grace, Chloe Sparrow, Kin, and Relative Happiness, which has been adapted into a feature film. A freelance writer and screenwriter, her column, Are You Kidding Me?, appears weekly in the Chronicle Herald's community newspapers. Lesley lives in Homeville, Nova Scotia. Her novel, The Spoon Stealer, has been nominated for the Jim Connors Dartmouth Book Award for Fiction. Welcome, Lesley.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
It is lovely to have you here. And Julie Curwin is a psychiatrist who divides her time between Sydney and Bulladree Island, Cape Breton, where she lives with her husband, Chris, and a variety of furry friends. Her short stories have won numerous awards, including the Commonwealth Short Story Prize for World Backwards in 2008, and the David Adams Richards Prize for a group of short stories. The Appendage, formerly known as Your Left Arm, is her first book and has been nominated for both the Alistair MacLeod Prize for Short Fiction and the Margaret and John Savage First Book Award for Fiction. Welcome, Julie.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Morgan Murray was born and raised on a farm near the same west central Alberta village as figure skating legend Kurt Browning, Caroline. He now lives, works, plays, writes, and builds all sorts of crooked furniture in Cape Breton, like the rest of us. In between, he has been a professional schemer, a farmer, a rancher, a roustabout, a secretary, a reporter, a designer, a tweeter, and a student in St. John's, Calgary, Prague, Montreal, Chicoutimi, and Paris. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Canadian Studies from the University of Calgary, a certificate in Central and Eastern European Studies from the University of Economics Prague, a Master of Philosophy and Humanities from Memorial University of Newfoundland, and a participation ribbon for beef calf showmanship, incomplete, I am sorry to tell you, from the Little Britches 4-H Club. His book, Dirty Birds, has been nominated for the Atlantic Publishers Marketing Association Best Atlantic Published Book Award, the Margaret and John Savage First Book Award for Fiction, and the Thomas Radal Atlantic Fiction Award. And he has also very recently been shortlisted for the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor. So his awards are literally racking up faster than his bio can keep up. Hey there, Morgan.
Thanks. That's why my head's so big on the screen. I'm having a good week. Thanks so much.
So welcome all of you, and huge congratulations on your nominations. They're all stupendous books, and it is a pleasure to get to talk with you this evening.
Thank you.
So I thought to get things started, maybe each of you could just tell us a little bit about your history here in Cape Breton Island, whether it's, whether you were born and raised and your family goes back umpteen generations, or if like Morgan and me, you just had the good sense to move here. And maybe just very broadly, just to get us started, maybe you could talk about how you see the influence of Cape Breton on your writing itself. You know, it's always so hard to recognize the water you're swimming in, but if you could maybe say if you feel like the books you've written would be fundamentally different if you'd written them elsewhere, and then we'll just take it from there. So Lesley, I think you are basically the reigning matriarch of Cape Breton Storytellers, so maybe you could start us off.
Okay, well, actually, I consider myself a Cape Bretoner, but I was born and raised in Montreal, and but spent every summer of my life here in Cape Breton. My mother was from Glace Bay, and she was a kindergarten teacher, so she would bring us down here every summer. And I always knew I was going to live here. It's just something in my bones, and I've been here for over 40 years now. My children were born here. I often think to myself, I might not have been a writer if I hadn't lived here. And I don't know why I say that, but there's just something that's so comfortable for me about this landscape and the people who live here. I have a great affinity with them. They are very familiar to me, and I like to people my books with the people who live here. Basically, the thing I remember the most growing up were the stories that my grandmother and relatives would tell me, and I would laugh and laugh and laugh. And I remember thinking when I started my own stories that's what I think when I think about Cape Breton, is people laughing. And so often the books that I had read about Cape Breton were sort of, going down the road, trying to get out, mining, drinking, and, and all the drug abuse, we all know that that's there. But for me, the laughter and the friendship of this place and the land that we, live on here, I don't think I'd be able to write if I couldn't listen to the water or see, what I see every morning, the eagles and everything. It's just the best place for me personally. That's why most of my books are located here. It's just a great ease in being able to write a story, because I kind of don't have to think. It's just right there in my head, and I love it.
Oh, I love that, and what you say about the laughter and friendship sort of transcending the some of the darker stories on the island. And I feel like there's elements of that in all three of your books, where there's this great dark wit that even in the hardest times, there's just this cutting humor that makes it all bearable and can turn in a moment something quite terrible into something quite funny. Just a long perspective that puts things in perspective, and it's quite interesting in these very different books. Otherwise, I wonder, Julie, what about your experience here on the island as a person living here and writing here?
Well, like Lesley, I wasn't born in Cape Breton. I was born in Moncton, New Brunswick. But I had the good fortune to marry a Cape Bretoner. And before we actually lived in Cape Breton, every time we would come home, his home to visit, we'd be driving across the Canso Causeway back to Ontario, and there'd be a tear in his eye, So I knew we would end up living here. And it's been great. But as far as my writing goes, the big thing for me living here was the community of writers. And so shortly after I moved here, which was in 2003, I decided, it was time for me to start writing. And I went online and to look for a writing workshop, and discovered Douglas Arthur Brown and what later became what he called the Bulliedry Island Writers Institute. But it was one of those remarkable coincidences, because I had just decided, okay, I need a writing course or workshop. I went online, and there was one starting 2 weeks later, 3 kilometers down the road from my cottage in Bulliedry at the little school, which is like within walking distance of my cottage. So it was like it was meant to happen. And I've worked with Douglas ever since then. Douglas started Bulliedry Island Press, and they ended up publishing my book. And it was really Douglas that, lit the fire under me to finally get the thing finished. And that community of writers has been really important for me. But I would also echo what Lesley said, the sense of humor here, the long tradition of storytelling. It definitely, there's something in the air that makes it easier, I think.
I love that idea of that ease. And I want to come back actually shortly to that, the question of having a writing community here. I always love hearing about people's writing communities, and I know there are some really good ones here on the island. But first, maybe Morgan, you can tell us about the rather winding road that brought you here.
Yes. Well, 4 for 4, none of us are Cape Bretoners on this Cape Breton storytelling event. Welcome. I was kidnapped here, and I'm being held hostage in this basement outside of Mabou. If my mom's watching, send help. No, I met a girl from Mabou, and here I am. And I was living in St. John's, Newfoundland, which is a fantastic place to be a writer, and a very hard place to avoid being a writer, because everybody there is a writer. And so I came from this really vibrant writing community to the middle of nowhere. I had driven through Cape Breton quickly on my way to Newfoundland in 2008. But I met Katie Beaton, who's my wife now, and she's upstairs fighting with a toddler. So if you hear screaming, just ignore it. But I met her, and she brought me to visit her home in Mabou, where she was living, and it felt like home from the first second I was here, which was never really happened anywhere else before. And so eventually she talked me into quitting my job and moving here. And I got a job with the Cape Breton Partnership, my day job. I'm going to talk about my day job, which is dangerous. But I was promoting innovation and entrepreneurship and all of this stuff in Cape Breton. And I started to sort of scratch at the surface of how do I promote sort of this hopeful optimism to a place that has had a struggling economy for so long. And it doesn't take long to find out that everybody in Cape Breton's creative in one way or another. And like one of my first visits to Mabou, Katie took me to the West Mabou Square Dance, which is at like 10 o'clock at night, down a dark road with no lights. I thought she was going to murder me and throw me in the bay. And you pull into this dark parking lot, and you walk into this dark hall, and there's 200 people dancing and singing and playing the fiddle and everything in the middle of nowhere. And it's unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Just the creativity oozes out of this place. And a lot of people sort of dismiss it as, oh, that's just something you do. You play the fiddle, or you step dance, or you tell stories, or you tell a joke, or all of that stuff. But it's hard to not notice it when you're coming from somewhere else. It's like, I grew up in Alberta in the foothills is a pretty high altitude. And when you grow up in where the air is thinner, you can kind of adjust to it. But when you come from sea level to that altitude, you're kind of short on breath. So it kind of felt like that. You're coming to a place where the air is different. And when you're bathed in it or you grow up in it, I think you might not always appreciate it. But yeah, it's a different kind of place. And so it's hard to, coming from Newfoundland, where I was a aspiring wannabe, not doing much writing, coming here, it was like, well, you better get writing because everybody else is doing something. So what are you going to do?
Mhm.
That's terrific. I feel like that is something that's rare in this place. And I know I lived away in cities for a while, and when I made the decision to move back to Nova Scotia, there were people who I think, elsewhere had an idea that this was going to be a move away from art and culture and so on. But I think for a largely rural place, there's a really unique appreciation for creativity and art here. And I wonder, have you all found that in your careers that people are more receptive and appreciative of writing and storytelling than some other places?
Certainly for me, that was true. I kind of stumbled into a wonderful writing community here, but I've lived in many other places in Canada, and I didn't find that in other places. So yeah, I mean the community here for me was fantastic, and they've been a big part of helping me through the years to keep writing.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
Yes.
go ahead, Lesley.
Oh, well, I'm the oddball because I think I might have gone to one writing class, once for a couple of weeks, and that was about it. But since then, I've, writers are coming out of the yin yang with not just in Cape Breton, but in Halifax, and there's this whole great big bunch of us, and it's wonderful. But no, mostly my writing has never been about meeting with other writers or anything like that. It's just I stay in this room, I shut the door even when there's nobody in the house. I just squirrel away in here, and I'm pretty antisocial now that I think of it. I guess I'm more of a loner than I think I am. But I mean, I know everybody's out there, and that's a lovely, lovely, reassuring thing. And if I ever needed anything, all I'd have to do is ask. But I just seem to be, I need to get away. But the big thing for here, my writing process is not a group of writers. It's going down our country laneway every morning, walking, seeing the wildlife, seeing the birds and the trees and the ocean. That's what I need. I write my stories as I'm walking. And then I'll sit down and write the novel in 2 months in front of the computer. I mean, it's already done when I sit down to write. So I do write my novels on the laneway here, outside. And that is my go-to. That's the crows. They're my go-to people. They listen to what I'm trying to do. So I sort of have a little bit of a different experience.
Now I'm not sure if people are too familiar with my book, Dirty Birds, but my dad calls it Dirty Words because there's a bit of swearing and off-colored humor in it. But the Brook Village Grocery, just up the road, a little tiny rural community grocery store, no bigger than the room I'm in now, has sold probably 80 copies of my book since it came out, which is more than Chapters has. And so just going out in the community, all these people are saying, oh, I read your book. And you're thinking, oh God, you shouldn't have. But they liked it. So it's been very nice and it's been a great sort of, I've lived here for almost 5 years now. So I should be part of the community, probably more than I am, but it's been a great sort of welcoming as people are saying, oh, Katie's husband actually does something. That's interesting. And somebody overheard in the grocery store a local more experienced lady, we'll say, saying it's the dirtiest book I've ever read, but I loved it. So I put that review on my website. It's pretty good.
I have to tell you, Morgan, one version of your bio I was sent called it "Dirty Books." Was the typo, and I was very tempted to let it stand. But yeah, I wonder, do you find, I mean, I feel like there's such an immediate receptive audience all around you here. You do get that feedback in a very direct, personal way, you know, at the co-op and so on. And I remember the first time it occurred to me that, you know, people in my choir were going to be reading my book, and what would they think of this particular page and things like that. And I don't know that it's quite the same, you know, in a big city or something, that you're encountering your readers all over the place like that. I wonder, do you find that, do you write with that at all in mind? Like, does it motivate you or terrify you like it does me, or something in between?
No, I never worry about, well, I make sure that I do really try not to use names that are around me. Because the first book I wrote, there was a really miserable character called Donelda, and I forgot all about Donelda, who lived down the road. And the first thing she said to me on the thing was, say, well, thank you for calling her Donelda. And I thought, ooh. But I said, it wasn't you, but you can't do that. You can't, I mean, I do try to stay away from stuff, but after a while, I mean, most people want to be in the book. They'll say, I'm sure this is about me, right? And I'm thinking, no. But you know, if you want it to be, yeah, sure. But the first place I'll go, of course, to get character names is to the phone book. I mean, you know, if you want to go to Maboo, well, what do? You've got Beatons, you know, you've got Rankins, and you've got, you know, like, they're just names there. The same way there are names here in Homeville would be the Fergusons and whatever. So you don't have to go very far to. What was I talking about? Whatever.
Nailed it.
Not letting it influence. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. People will forgive. No, people will forgive you here. It's not a big deal. You know, it's not a big deal.
Well, people are just so excited, I've found, and supportive, and think it's just this wonderful thing. Even though you wrote this like smutty book about dummies in Montreal, they're just like, it's just so great that you wrote a book. Congratulations. And then every time you're in the newspaper or the Oran or something, people are coming up to you, and it's like you're a big deal, even though you're absolutely not. But it's kind of heartwarming and nice, and makes you feel like home is looking after you, if nothing else.
Well, that's it. That's true. Very true.
I was curious about you, Julie, with your book, which so many of the stories overlap with some of the environments of your work. Like there's you know, a lot of patients in mental health, and even a psychiatrist with a somewhat similar first name, and so on. And I wonder, have you encountered people who make assumptions about, you know, where this and that story comes from, or try to read into your life from your book?
Yeah, I've had a bit of that. One of my colleagues was convinced that he was the handsome male psychiatrist in the book. But you know, and I'm obviously very careful not to.
You need to unpack that with them.
You know, I'm obviously careful not to have too much, to have patient information. So the characters are all kind of just amalgams of many different people, and I haven't had too many people come up to me and say, I think I'm in the book. And the psychiatrist with the similar name is definitely not me, thankfully, because she has some serious problems. But I don't know why she ended up with a similar name, actually. That maybe it's some Freudian thing. Maybe I'm more disturbed than I think. But you know, my writing buddies, when I bump into them in the community, they're very excited, and that's been the wonderful thing, because I tend to be kind of lazy by nature, and unlike Lesley, I have a hard time just locking myself in the office and doing it on my own. So it's been a very supportive writing community that I've been part of here, and a number of books, including several award-winning books, have come out of that little writing community, and we're always like genuinely happy for each other. So I've gotten a lot of feedback from my friends and writing buddies here, and they've been very, you know, excited, and it's been great. Yeah.
That's really nice. It's interesting the different experiences you've each spoken of with your writing community here. And I know, Lesley, you said you're drawing your inspiration more so from the landscape around you and the piece of the outdoor world here. But and Morgan, that you kind of walked away from like a more urban writing community in St. John's. Do you feel like now that you've been here a little longer, have you begun to develop a writing community around you, or?
Well, every once in a while we go up to Marguerite and you can't kick a rock without hitting a writer. Rebecca. So that's nice. It's in St. John's, I was part of an actual writing group, and we get together every couple of weeks and just tear each other to shreds in the most loving and kind way. Well, it wasn't always kind, but the most loving way. And that was really helpful, informative to sort of develop the craft. But I wrote the book kind of after I had been kidnapped to Cape Breton. And you bunch in Marguerite, we don't get together and talk shop so much, but we get together when COVID allows, so our kids can roll in the mud together. And it's just nice to be in a place where there's other people doing a similar kind of job or sort of job, and kind of knows what your life is kind of like a little bit. So it's less about sort of the craft of writing now and more about sort of like, so what are you working on now? Oh, kids, am I right? No, just the sympathy community now, I think, is really nice.
I can't relate to that at all. I could, yeah. It's interesting because for me, with some of those Marguerite writers, we kind of moved here together after being part of a writing community in Montreal and accidentally having overlapping dreams of living here. And but we used to very regularly get together to workshop our work there, and for whatever reason, the kids are probably a big part of it. It hasn't happened so much here, but I do think there's something about the sense that there's this supportive environment, this supportive community all around you here, which makes that less critical in some ways. Like I feel like, I mean, it might surprise some of you listening to know, but there are places in the world where people worry that writing might not be a solid way to make money. And I have never had anyone question me about that here. And I think in part it must be that this is a place where not a lot of people are here to make a lot of money. They're here because they came or they stayed because of just how wonderful it is to live here. And so you value other things than just what you're able to put in your bank account.
Well, in Mabou, everybody here is a professional fiddler, but in their spare time, they're like the premier of the province, or run a bakery, or a massage therapist or something. But those are their side hustles. So it makes sense to have writing aspirations and have a hobby that pays.
True. Morgan, your book is so much about place. I feel. I mean, you celebrate and eviscerate the exact time period and neighborhood that I lived in Montreal, and then you move on to St. John's, and I feel like you managed to de-romanticize two of the most romantic places in Canada, and you just basically pass through Cape Breton to get to the ferry. Your book, I mean, of course, but I wonder, do you see yourself writing about Cape Breton in future books? I would be interested to see you.
It depends if I can get the what's the word, the smart aleckness out of my system enough to not eviscerate. To use your word. I feel like if I eviscerated Cape Breton, I might myself be eviscerated. So in my book, I called Cape Breton the picture of maritime quaintness. It's just such a lovely place. I had nothing cynical or sarcastic to say about it, unlike everywhere else in the book does get kind of eviscerated. So we'll see. I'm also trying to grapple with kind of, I'm from Alberta, and I don't know if anybody has seen the news in the last ever, but Alberta's a mess. And trying to figure out what I came from and what's happening to the people I grew up around is an interesting question. Well, not a tragic one at the moment. But but also Cape Breton is such a fascinating place full of fascinating stories too. And so once I feel I need to be rooted here a little bit more before I can sort of start telling stories from here, if that makes any sense. But I feel like I can have at Newfoundland and Montreal and Alberta because I've been there, done that, and they got it coming.
Well, that seems fair. And you got out of town, so you're safe.
Yeah, well, for now,
Go
until they
back.
find me.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about because I do, whenever applying for grants and things for the Writers Festival, I always cite all the incredible writers that have come from this little island, and it's an impressive list and ever growing. And as you say, Lesley, I mean, you have obviously a much longer view of this than I, but it feels like it just keeps blooming, like more writers appearing and out of the woodwork and writing communities all the time. I'm curious if you feel consciously connected to that writing tradition or influenced by some of the great Cape Breton writers that have come before.
Well, it's very reassuring, I guess. It's just, I don't know, I just sort of feel very privileged to be even mentioned, with some of the other names, of course, that we all know from Cape Breton, and much better writers than I. But it's almost like you feel that you're privileged to be part of, being mentioned in the same breath. Like I remember reading Farley Mullet and Alistair MacLeod and all this kind of stuff, and the big thing with, he used to, he writes in his little cottage, his little bungalow, and off the cliffs of Cape Breton. I'm thinking, yes, I do that too. Well, no, I don't, but because I always heard that he only wrote like one word at a time and took like 10 years to write a novel. And I said, well, that's a real male way of writing. Because I had the kids to feed. So it's a little way of doing it. But I don't know, it's just lovely to be part and parcel of this place. And it's like Morgan said, it's every time, anything you do, I have this wonderful audience, these readers. It doesn't matter what I throw at them, they read it and they want to know when the next one is. And it's just like, I don't know why that happened, but it's gotten to the point where I can't go, well, now I can't go into a washroom at Tim Hortons, but when I used to, people would say, oh my God, Lesley! and I've had people somebody tried to find Homeville just the other day. She said, my friend and I, we went out on a reconnaissance mission trying to find Homeville, but we couldn't find the sign. And I said, well, I hate to tell you, but I'm going to call 911 if somebody's looking in my window at night. But they make you feel like you're just part of the family. I'm just part of the family for these people. And they make me feel like I know what I'm doing, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I only ever just write for myself. You have to forget about audience altogether. You just have the joy for me is the writing, and everything else after that is, it's certainly not. I wouldn't call it a career for myself. It's just this little hobby that I have, and the selling of the book and all that is just kind of, it's fine, but it's not what I do it for. I do it so I can sit in this room and just write for myself. Squirrel away, just that's the fun part. But the wonderful part is that when you do walk out the door, there are people who just say, oh, I just love your books, and they can't wait to come up and tell you, and they're so sweet to you. And yes, I doubt I would get that on the streets of Montreal if I still lived there. Although the book I just finished writing takes place in Montreal in 1967. A 12-year-old girl, and of course I was 12 in 1967 in Montreal, and I just loved writing it. And completely out of the this realm here, but I don't know. I just love it. Anyway, I don't know. Again, I don't know what I was talking about. Sorry. I just ramble. I haven't talked to people in so long. Help me.
No, I know we all have that. I think that there is there is something amazing about Cape Breton audiences. Like there's nobody's going to laugh harder at every joke than a Cape. They're so supportive. You feel them waiting on every word, and it's a lovely thing, as you say, when you get to the end of the solitary part of writing, to have that kind of an audience waiting for you is it's a pretty lovely thing. And I'm glad you mentioned Alistair MacLeod, because it feels like you really you can't talk about writing or storytelling in Cape Breton without talking about him. And he was someone who was so much informed by, you know, from the music and the Gaelic language, and that's so much a part of like that unique, beautiful musicality in every sentence, one word at a time. But Julie, do you have any, or Morgan, any writers who've been an influence for you here?
Certainly Alistair MacLeod, and lots of different short story writers for the book that I've just finished, at least. You know, a lot of short story writers from here and from the US. There's a storytelling tradition in the south of the US, which I find, which has a lot of parallels to the storytelling tradition in Cape Breton, sort of larger than life characters and a kind of dark humor. So yeah, those have been some of the influences. But yeah, it's as Lesley was saying, the excitement that people in this community have, the genuine joy that they have that people are creating things, and that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's the people alongside you as much as the people who've come before. Did you want to say anything to that, Morgan? I thought of Cape Breton as the thought control center of Canada a little bit with your book and the great legacy of Canadian humor novels that it's part of.
Yeah, and there's a lot of influences in the work, and I could chew your ear off for days about that. But a big thing for me was marrying Katie, and you know, she's a New York Times best-selling children's book, comic book. She's another whole other level, and seeing the work that goes into that is remarkable thing to see every day. And you know, I'm here typing my one word a day, twirling my mustache, thinking how brilliant I am, and she's across the room just, you know, working herself half to death on everything that goes into it. And seeing that is very humbling and motivating. But also she's, not to make this the Kate Beaton appreciation hour, but every hour at my house is, she's very much the product of Mabou, and you can see it in her relatives and the locals, and how they talk and how they tell a story and how they view the world and everything. And she was the one who packaged it into little comic strips and shared it with the world, and it could only come from here. So to be here, to be able to have a front row seat to what is going on in her whole other level, it can't help but sort of kick you in the pants and be like, okay, well, we're writing a book, and the baby is crying. You're going to rock the baby with your foot while you write the book. And it's not one word at a time, a day. It's nothing romantic about it. It's work, and you're going to do it. And sometimes it turns out, apparently.
That's amazing. Yeah, I had a feeling you might be under the influence of Katie Beaton.
Just a bit.
Well, I wonder. I'm pretty sure that I know your answer on this, but I wonder whether you ever feel living here that it's in any way holding you back to not be part of, you know, more the hubbub of, you know, the tour circuit and the bigger city writing communities and, you know, publishing hubs like, you know, the Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal and so on. Do you feel like that? You feel any loss around that?
Well, not for me. I'm afraid I'm very, very bad. I'm really bad because when they, Nimbus sends me off to some of these things, I used to go to Toronto and places like that, and I'd be asked on a stage very esoteric questions about writing and the angst of writing, and I would find there was this one woman, and she drive me crazy, and I'm thinking, oh my God. And she's just going on and on. Finally I said, look, I got into writing as a way, to avoid housework, basically, is what it was. And she looked at me like I was off my rocker. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to change who I am just from you can get some kind of convoluted story from me, because this is who I am. It's the same way when they say, well, and what are your favorite books? Well, my favorite books are children's books, nursery rhymes, the things that I read when I was a little kid going to the library in Westmount. Those are my favorite books. So, and the fact that I can't remember the names of any books that I read anymore, so it's not a good question to ask me, but people always ask you, what are you reading? Well, who was your favorite? I had no idea. But to say nursery rhymes is not really a good thing to do. But I say it anyway because it's the truth. Like I know I don't, like I say, I don't think of this as a career, but I'm old. I'm not, maybe if I was 30, I would be compelled to do something about it. I could care less. My hair's gone gray now thanks to COVID. I don't care. You know what I mean? It's a good place to be, to just write these books or not write them, whatever. I really don't care anymore. It's a lovely place to be. So no, I could care less. But don't tell Nimbus.
Working for you, Lesley. Whatever you're doing, it's working.
Well, that's it. I mean, I might as well keep doing what I'm doing. Why not? So don't mind me.
What about you, Julie and Morgan? Do you feel similarly, or?
I can't remember what the question was.
Oh, sorry. Whether you feel that there's any sense of being, writing or building a writing career. So sorry, I've just used air quotes. but
True.
Whether you feel in any way, limited or isolated or held back in any way living here. I mean, I know it's a question often from people from away who imagine that being outside of, the busy literary urban scene that there might be some sense of lack, but
no, I mean, I think with the miracles of the internet and where it's all one small world now, and for me, probably more so than Morgan and Lesley, it really is a side gig. My day job is wonderful here, and so no, I don't have any concerns in that regard now. I think it's been nothing but positive, really.
For me, it's my first book, so I assume it's always like this, like you can't leave your house for 2 years. So last week I was in Sudbury and Quebec City, and this week I'm in Atlantic Canada, and who knows where I'll be next week. So that's been kind of a nice.
You're not allowed to go anywhere. What were you doing in Sudbury?
What's anybody doing in Sudbury? I wasn't actually in Sudbury. God help me. But no, I've been in my basement talking to my computer for a year and a half. So that's been a weird experience. But I've lived in a lot of places, and the difference, there's a lot of aspiring writers everywhere. Everybody's an aspiring writer. The difference is writers write. They close the door when nobody's home and sit down and type until they got a book. And it's work, and it doesn't matter where you're doing it. It has to be done. And the worst things I've ever written in my life were in like the cafes where Ernest Hemingway hung out in Paris. I was there for like 6 weeks, and the trash I wrote there is just awful. In Montreal, I wrote the worst poetry. It was so bad. I couldn't come up with worse poetry when I was writing about a bad poet in my book, so I just put that in there. But Cape Breton is a lovely, lovely place to live, no matter what you're doing. And if you are fortunate enough to be able to write while you're here, that's great. And like the Mabu coal mines is crawling with these famous, internationally renowned people. Like Robert Frank just passed away this past year, but he was like the world's greatest living photographer. And one of my favorite stories about Robert Frank is Katie growing up knew him as this crazy old guy from the coal mines, and she moved to New York City for a little while. And she was on the bus one day and there's a billboard with his face on it because he's having like a lifetime retrospective show at the Met or whatever. And she thought, that's weird. That looks like crazy old Robert from the coal mines. So it doesn't matter where you are. And I don't think it's ever mattered where you are. And you do the work. And if the work is good and you hustle to sell it, it'll sell. And if you don't, it won't. And whatever. Just do you, be happy.
Well, that is a perfect note on which to transition to some questions from some of our audience out there. And the first one is for you, and it's a really important one, Morgan. It's from Jane Doucette, who would like to know, where did Morgan get his shirt?
Oh, very important, hard-hitting question. My sister gave this to me. I think it's from the internet, but it's got all the birds with dirty names. And it goes along well with my book. So it's, you know, the blue-footed booby and things like that. So it's my fancy book event shirt.
Great. So
Very appropriate.
yeah, get in touch with Morgan's sister, Jane, and maybe she can hook you up. And Mike Carter would like to ask, how do you know when you've written enough but not too much? Or how do you give the reader enough information without slowing the pace of the story?
Oh, I remember the first time my first book, I asked my editor, I said, when do you know it's over? And she said, it's over when it's over. I said, oh, okay, but that's it. It's over when it's over. You know when it's over. There's no sense in keeping, writing any more sentences. It becomes something that you just know instinctively. But I just love that explanation. It's over when it's over, and don't try to, oh my God, I need 120,000 words or whatever. Just write the story, and if it ends at 80,000, it ends at 80,000. And apparently that's what they want. That's what somebody said. They want between 80 and 100,000. Well, I keep writing these books that are like 120 or whatever. But I know, like the one I just wrote is just like 85,000 or something, but it's over. It's good to know.
That's it.
That's it. In other words. Oh dear. So just don't fret. Don't fret about it.
Yeah, I'm terrible for writing advice. You should not, and publishing. I've done everything wrong and backwards. And I had a professor in university, because I have this really bad habit of I can't outline to save my life. Apparently you're supposed to like write an outline and then just like go to that. I need to write out my thoughts because they're just a jumble. And my old professor called it clearing my throat. And she was like, most things you write, you should just take the first half and throw them away. So the manuscript for Dirty Birds was 135,000 words, and the final version's 110-ish. And those 25,000 words came out of part one. Yeah, I'm very verbose and just keep going around in circles, and I have to cut a lot of it out in editing. But he did ask kind of about pacing and stuff, and that's a very important thing for me too. And like Lesley said, it came from like nursery rhymes and Dr. Seuss when I was a kid. The way that I grew up hearing these stories that I liked so much that sounded like music. And so whenever I'm writing, I'm trying to keep that pace and that sort of cadence of the language going. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but yeah, I have yet to find an easy, straightforward way to write a novel. All one that I've done.
Yeah, but one that you've done that's now up for every bloody award going. So I mean, you must have done something right.
A blind squirrel, Lesley. A blind squirrel.
I can't wait to read it. I can't wait.
Julie, Cynthia Bauman asks whether you could speak a bit more about your favorite short story writers from the American South and how they've inspired or instructed you.
Now I'm going to have to remember the names. Kevin Brockmeyer, I think, is one of them. They're probably right behind me on the shelf. I could turn around and look. There's several of them, and their names are escaping me right now. But what I like about them is, as I was saying, they tend to have very quirky, larger than life characters, and characters that can really like make you laugh and tug at your heart at the same time. William Gay, that was another one. And there are a few more, but their names are escaping me right now. But there is a certain style that comes out of the American South, which is very similar to that sort of Gaelic humor, dark humor, and larger than life characters, and so on. And that's what I attempt to do in my stories. And as for the other question, when do I know that they're finished? Someone asked me that before, and I said my stories are finished when Douglas, the editor, says they're finished, because Douglas would often be getting me to cut things, and I would think, oh, that story's done, and he'd say, no, you got to change this and that. So and some stories I would think needed more work, and he'd say, no, you're done. So I think getting a second opinion on whether you're done or not, at least in writing short stories, can help.
Editors are very important.
Yeah.
Very important.
Person in your life to tug the manuscript out of your hands at some point.
Yeah.
I think it's Alistair MacLeod that there's like a story of, was it Doug Gibson, his editor, who had to basically pull the book out of his hands as he
drive to Cape Breton and like
yeah
abscond with manuscript because he wouldn't stop tinkering.
I don't know if it's myth or fact, but it's a great story. So Chris Milburn is asking, how much do you read when you're writing? Does writing get in the way of reading, or do you have to do both at the same time in order to write well?
I can't read anything when I'm in the zone. I can't have anything else come in, because then I'm reading something, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so good. And then you start to doubt yourself. But no, I have to be laser focused on what I'm doing. And then it's a big relief when that's done. So then I can just enjoy another book. But I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So I'm not surprised that that's how I work.
I do read when I'm writing, but I tend to read. When I was writing short stories, I would be writing stories that were not necessarily similar in terms of subject matter, but getting back to Morgan was saying about the rhythm of words, they would be stories that had sort of the same cadence, the same patterns or rhythms, and it would get me into the headspace of hearing the pattern of the words in my mind. So while I was writing this book of short stories, I would be reading short stories that were similar in that way, even though the subject matter and everything might be completely different. So
I have a confession to make. I'm barely literate.
Sorry.
I'm a terrible reader. I'm the world's worst reader. If I had to count right now, I'm probably reading 500 books. There's books I leave like a trail of breadcrumbs everywhere I go. Is books where there's the bookmark after chapter 1, and I'll get back to that in 7 or 8 or 25 years. So I start a lot of books. I finish very few, which is probably why I had to rewrite the ending of my book about 15 times, because I've never actually read the end of a book. But I find that when I'm trying to write and trying to get words down on a page, I have to avoid everything unless it's for a very specific reason, which is theft. Otherwise, I start, like, if I start reading Kurt Vonnegut for pleasure while I'm trying to write, I just write like I'm imitating Kurt Vonnegut, and it never goes well. So I kind of have to like block out everything and just focus on doing me. And if I'm stuck on some stylistic or structural kind of thing, I'll find a similar kind of thing that solved that problem and try to steal whatever worked from that. But that's just pure business, not pleasure at all. Pleasure writing, I like to graze more than anything.
Well, Louise Michalos, I'm sorry, I'm butchering a lovely name, I'm sure, is wondering which point of view you prefer to write from.
In my book of short stories, I have first person and third person, and one story that's in second person. So I don't really, I mean, second person is difficult, but I find some stories lend themselves better to first person narrators, and other stories are better told from a more objective third person point of view. But so I don't really have a favorite.
For Dirty Birds, I started it in first person, but Milton, Ontario, the protagonist, was far too angry, and I worried that he'd become like a well, he wasn't going to become anything, but I was worried he's going to become this like leader of some sort of angry white man movement. And so I was like, oh no, let's pull this back to third person and make him the butt of the joke instead of just this angry young guy. So I guess I like third person because it was the way I did it. I probably do that again. First person, it's hard not to write in. I find it's hard not to write as me, and sort of share all my neuroses with the world. They're there in third person, but they're camouflaged as somebody else's.
I didn't write first person for a long time because I was nervous, because I knew that the character had to be in every scene, and I didn't know if I would know how to do that. So I avoided it for a long time. But the minute I did it, I loved it the best. So, although, like you say, the story will tell you if it's going to be third person, first person, you know, as you go along. You can tell about 10 pages in if something's going to work or if it's not going to work. So, but I do like first person. And of course, the last book, I have what I've wanting to do for a long time was have a dog who talked. And I did it, and I'm so glad that it worked. That's one of my, I'm very, very happy about that. I'd love to have a talking dog in all my books, but I don't think it's going to work.
Go for it.
I don't think people will let me do it again, but I just loved it.
Did you write it in first dog or third dog?
It was, oh, actually, no. It was third dog. Yeah. But it's so good. Oh my gosh, I love it.
I'm so sorry to say that I think we only have time here for one last question, but there are some great ones here, and it has been a real pleasure to speak with all of you and to answer and to hear you answer all these great questions. But just to close out our evening together here, Susan Walsh asks, how different do you think your books would be if you had grown up in Cape Breton, since, as Morgan pointed out, for all of us transplants?
More fiddles for sure. First thing. For me, I with my first book, I was scared to depart too far from my real life. So it's too much autobiography in there probably. But I know the prairies, I knew Montreal, and I knew Newfoundland well enough to write them. If I grew up here, it would be fundamentally different based on sort of that experience of coming from here, and the sort of, I know like Katie's childhood, I grew up on a farm in rural Alberta, so our childhoods were similar in some ways, but the impact of the rise and fall of the coal and steel industries here and the fishery and all of that stuff had an impact on her upbringing. That I grew up in oil boom Alberta, so that's quite different. So it's hard to say, but more fiddles, definitely.
I actually think that I probably wouldn't I think if I had lived here from the very beginning, I wouldn't have noticed all the little things that I noticed from being away. But like I say, I knew I wanted to live here even when I was a kid, because when I would come here, it was all the little things. It was being able to hang out clothes on a clothesline. It was just all these little things that my grandmother was doing, that the elderly aunts were doing. I was so fascinated. I remember I was fascinated with the Gertie dogs in Glace Bay because they were covered in coal dust. And if I had grown up here, I don't think I would have noticed any of that stuff. But the minute I got here, I wanted to celebrate all these silly things that gave me great pleasure about this place. And if I had grown up here, maybe I wouldn't have recognized any of it. So who knows?
That's a really tough question for me. I really have no idea if or how my book would have been different. I'm sure it would have been, but I'm not sure exactly how, because it's not. My book is more about people that I've come across in my professional life, which probably would have been fairly similar anywhere. And some of the stories are actually about people that I met and knew before coming to Cape Breton. So my gut feeling is it wouldn't have been that different, but who knows?
Oh, but you wouldn't have the Butterscotch Palace, which I
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
interpretation, but
Love that place.
well, that brings us to the end of our event. And thank you so much to Lesley Crewe, Julie Curwin, and Morgan Murray for being here tonight. This has been such an honor for me, and I know such a joy for everyone who got to listen to all these words of wisdom. And thank you so much to all of you listening in the audience from wherever you're connecting from. It's a pleasure to be able to reach you this way, even across a screen. So you can visit atlanticbookawards.ca if you'd like to find information about some of the other great author events that are happening this week, which includes the virtual awards gala this Thursday, where we'll find out which awards these three amazing writers I hope will have earned. So we hope to see you there, and I wish the best of luck to you, Julie and Lesley and Morgan. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.